Welcome to SuperTalk Outdoors, where we celebrate every single Monday at lunchtime the world-class outdoors of the state of Mississippi. Because as I say every week, Mississippi is the capital of the outdoors in America. I want to thank you for joining us on the powerful SuperTalk Mississippi Radio Network or on SuperTalk TV at C Spire TV. But you might be watching the show on YouTube or Facebook or listening on your favorite podcast. It's February the 5th, 2024. You know, I've got a little bit of a message for you this morning. About 2 years ago, I became the host of SuperTalk Outdoors, which was previously known as Mississippi Outdoors Radio. That was actually a brand owned by the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks. We decided to change the name of SuperTalk Outdoor to SuperTalk Outdoors to create a separation between the show and the department. The goal of the new show was to celebrate Mississippi's outdoors, and it was also to celebrate the employees of the department. But we'd also discuss from time to time why what happens in Jackson and Washington matters mightily to outdoorsmen and women. And by the way, as you know, every week, I've made it really clear that my comments are my own and not those of the foundation. I wouldn't have agreed to do this show if I couldn't have an independent voice, and every single person understood that. During my time as host, though, I have occasionally commented about the actions of the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks Commission. Now, this is a 5-member board appointed by the governor, and it's responsible for setting policies for the department. Unfortunately, they sometimes make decisions without public input and disregard scientific evidence, particularly as it relates to important issues like the management of chronic wasting disease. I've also had concerns about the commission potentially legalizing the sale and transfer of white-tailed deer. By discussing the issue on this show, we were able to actually slow down the process a bit, but the amount of politics and backroom deals and favoritism surrounding that issue, I came to understand as disheartening. Some commissioners and politically connected deer breeders didn't appreciate the open opposition from myself and my guests. These are just 2 examples of the issues discussed on my show. Raising concerns about the public process of the commission led commissioners and Executive Director Lynn Posey to begin to work to silence my voice. That has gone on for about a year now. Last week, though, the foundation withdrew funding for the show at the behest of Lynn Posey and the commission without any public discussion and without a commission vote. Incidentally, this was after the commission attempted to have me fired. I want to make it clear that SuperTalk has remained supportive of the show and has never once wavered in its commitment to preserving open discussions, and especially on important issues. These are values that sit at the core of what SuperTalk was built upon. Trust in our public institutions, such as, for example, the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks Commission, is crucial for successful wildlife and conservation management in Mississippi. It is our collective responsibility to protect and cherish public trust, ensuring that our wildlife legacy is built on integrity, fairness, good science, and the common good. SuperTalk Outdoors will continue to fulfill its role, coveting our independent voice. We're grateful that we have so much support from conservation organizations across the state and the people of Mississippi who care deeply about the state's wildlife and conservation efforts. I gotta say, though, that I have been deeply honored to be associated with the dedicated volunteer leadership of the foundation. They are doing vital fundraising to support conservation efforts in the state, and we're going to continue to support their efforts however and whenever we can. Now, let's focus on our attention on the important work of conservation in Mississippi, as there is a lot to be done. We need to start a movement. Before I go to our first guest, I want to share with you real quick something I posted about the legislative process at the SuperTalk Outdoors Facebook page. There are bills in the Mississippi legislature that will create some important debates regarding Mississippi's wildlife legacy. Among the bills will be the generationally important opportunity to take the decision regarding the sale and transfer of white-tailed deer away from the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks Commission. Mississippi has based its wildlife success on the North American model of wildlife conservation. At the core of this legal principle is the proclamation that all wildlife belongs to the people. Sources close to the issue say some current Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks commissioners support a very few rich deer breeders who want to become deer kings. We'll explain that term here in just a second. It's a pretty applicable term. These politically connected deer breeders have worked hard behind the scenes to stack the deck against the rest of us. Some close to the issue say we're as close as one vote on the commission away from a disaster. We now have a chance to close the door on this legislatively. Let's get this done. Let's do what we need to do so that we can remain the capital of the outdoors in America. We have to work harder to take politics out of wildlife conservation. If we don't, a few politically connected people are ready to blow it up, what has made Mississippi's conservation efforts a success and a leader in America. Please join me in strongly supporting closing the door on this issue and preserving Mississippi's wildlife legacy. And just one other. There will be an important conversation and debate as well about the structure of the Mississippi Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks Commission during this session. One bill introduced by Timmy Ladner, who's a Republican from Poplarville, works to address the size and qualifications of the commission. His bill would add 4 members, creating a total of 9 commissioners. It also requires 4 commissioners to have a bachelor's degree related to wildlife management or conservation. If there's an absence of a bachelor's degree related to wildlife management or conservation, 10 years of work experiences in a related field may be substituted. Another bill in front of the legislature suggests making the commission advisory and having the executive director of the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks report directly to the governor. I have to say that based on, this is my side comment here, but based on my recent experience with Executive Director Lynn Posey, I don't think that's a good idea. We darn sure don't want to be stuck with an executive director appointed by the governor who doesn't cherish the public trust. These are important public debates, though, that need to happen. As it is now, the commission can make policy with only 3 votes, and there is no wildlife conservation management degree or experience necessary. There's a clarion call for these discussions. By the way, Representative Timmy Ladner, if he can join us, will actually be joining us for the last segment of today's meeting, today's show, to discuss his bill. So now let's shift gears. I want to move over to my friend, James Cummings. James is the Executive Director of Wildlife Mississippi and the incoming chairman of the Boone and Crockett Club, North America's oldest conservation organization. He wrote the book on the North American model of wildlife conservation, and I am thrilled to have him with me today. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, Got rid of a rainy weekend.
So you can see from my opening comments, there's a flurry of activity going on. But I think the most important thing people need to hear that in spite of all these efforts, my independent voice will be preserved. And we'll be able to talk about these important issues so for the public to hear it. And you know what? The other point about the legislative process, it's important that the legislature make decisions like around the sale of wildlife. That shouldn't be a 3-vote decision by the commission. And it's important that we have debates about the makeup of the commission. This is all positive. This is important for our state to have these discussions, isn't it?
Absolutely, and I think what you're seeing, Ricky, is whether it be on both sides or different schools of thought, wildlife and conservation and our natural resources are so important to this state, and that's why we're having multiple bills being introduced. You know, I'm thrilled that our legislature takes such an interest in conservation and the stewardship of our natural resources, and helps really try to make these things better. It's not just all about hunting or fishing. This is big economic development for the state as well.
It really is. I mean, it's about the vitality of communities across Mississippi. But you know, James, one of the interesting things I just want to share with you is as a former publisher of newspapers, which I had a terrific career and retired in 2016, didn't expect to be working again. I've loved doing this show and my other show as a way to connect and make a difference in the community. But all those years of experience, I think, have positioned me well to have the kind of conversations and public discussions about the public trust that we need to have. I look at your past, man. What led you into the role that you're in today? And then the fact that you're president of North America's oldest conservation organization, and you wrote the book on the North American model of wildlife conservation. Do you find yourself sometimes thinking there's a little divine intervention that you find yourself in this moment?
Yeah, and I'll tell you, a lot of this goes back to actually one of the early executive directors, who is a guy by the name of Jack Herring. And I'm fortunate enough that Jack is my mother's brother. Uh, so,
Really? Yeah.
so Uncle Jack got me interested in all of this. And of course, I have other relatives, Benny Earl Herring, and many others that have been wildlife biologists over time. And sure, we absolutely get frustrated when politics trumps science.
But it's as long as we're having a public debate, and as long as we are cherishing the public trust in the process and not doing the good work behind the scenes, we're going to be better off as a state. Hey, when we come back on the other side, we'll continue our conversation with James Cummings. We'll see you after this break. Welcome back to Super Talk Outdoors. I have my friend James Cummings, who's the executive director of Wildlife Mississippi and the president of the Boone and Crockett Club. And then when you add in the midst of all of that, he has written prolifically about the North American model for wildlife conservation. And I'm thrilled to call him a friend, and I respect him so much for the work that he does and his board does in the community. You think about where you are and the opportunity you have, not only in your role as with Wildlife Mississippi, but now with the Boone and Crockett Club. You've got a chance to really make sure that the ideals that the Boone and Crockett Club was built upon are the things that continue to guide our conservation efforts across America. That's got to be exciting for you.
It really is. I mean, if you think about, to me, one of my favorite presidents was Theodore Roosevelt, and he formed the club in 1887, and a lot of what he stood for and where he wanted to take this nation. And I was reading last night, it was a 1903 publication on the Convention of Governors that he put together a national convention on conservation. And a lot of it was about the well-being of the nation. And that's why we need to be looking at conserving our forests and our waters and our rivers. It wasn't about just more hunting. It was about the future of this great country.
Yeah, it's so, you look back at all of that, look at the history of it. And it's incredibly important because we don't want this discussion about the sale and transfer of whitetail deer and wildlife in general. We'll talk about here in just a second. But we've always got to be aware there's going to be special interests that want to change the way we do things. And I think what you bring to the table is a wonderful awareness of the history that got us here, and you're passionate about that, aren't you?
Absolutely. I mean, and Mississippi has played such a huge role nationally in whether it be conservation legislation or a lot of what we're talking about from a standpoint of fair chase and breeding deer and deer inside fences. When Roosevelt came to Mississippi in 2002 and he refused to shoot a tied up bear and the teddy bear was born, that was the birth of fair chase hunting. I mean, it runs in this state's blood, So
look, let's remind people before we get too far away from it. I've talked about it a lot. You and I've had shows about it. I've posted about it, but I've come to appreciate. When you think about transferring wild animals, you have to think about the science behind it and whether you'd be transferring diseases. You look over in Texas, for example, the way they've spread CWD, et cetera. The notion around conservation and the North American wildlife model and that wildlife belong to the people, that the basis for Mississippi's success is rooted in that, isn't it?
Absolutely. Even if you look at part of the Pittman-Robertson Act, the key author of that the main author was Key Pittman. He was born in Vicksburg. But I mean, if you mentioned public trust in a little bit different light. When our nation was formed, and a lot of times you like to talk about deer kings, and in Great Britain, the king owned all the animals. They owned the rights to guns, so you couldn't overthrow the government. And when the United States was formed in colonial America, we didn't want to be like that. So, wildlife is in public trust. You own the wildlife. I own the wildlife. All of us as citizens own that. Firearms were also very linked to wildlife ownership, in terms of the way we structured things, very different than what existed in where many of us came from.
When people think about the Boone and Crockett Club, they think about records and stuff like that. And certainly that's a role you play. But What's at the core of what makes that organization so strong after so many years?
So our records program dates back to 1902. So it's got a little age on it. And it's not about just having who killed the biggest buck, or I have two caribou, I might add, in the record book. But it's not about that. It's about when somebody kills an animal of that quality. There are 32 big game animals that qualify for the record book. It's about collecting biological data, population and habitat data, and overall it's an indicator of herd health. The killing of the person doing that is a minor part, So that's really what our records program is about. It's a data collection method that helps us in wildlife management. And if we go screwing that up, if you, for example, if you put a $6 million man in the human race, that skews your data up. You can't have something that's so manipulated like that. And plus, it's not fair chase.
Yeah.
I mean, shooting something inside a pen, that's not what this club is about. And in fact, if you shoot something inside a pen or a fence, it does not qualify, and you can't even use our scoring system to score it. And most people don't realize that.
Hey, what would be interesting, and we can talk about this on a future show. We'll talk a little bit more about CWD going forward, but I've really spent a lot of time studying Illinois and Wisconsin because these are two states that have taken entirely different approaches to the management of CWD. Wisconsin is a little bit more like Mississippi is currently. Hopefully we change that, but that's just the reality of it. What happens when CWD takes hold in your state is that you lose basically mature deer. And so it would be interesting to see if in the Boone and Crockett statistical data that you see some states beginning to lose older deer.
I certainly hope that's not the case. I mean, our legislation on our books and our Mississippi Code, our commission has a right to protect native wildlife as well as the recreational economy. And if we end up losing, that larger segment, I mean, every time I turn around, Mississippi is taking better and larger whitetails. And eventually, I mean, we're in the top 10 states in Boone and Crockett's record book in terms of the largest whitetail deer. That's cool. That is so far different than when I was in 11th or 12th grade and we were all shooting 1.5 year old bucks, But yeah, we've got to do everything in our power to protect us from things that are going to hurt the state's economy and hurt our native wildlife. And I think there's opportunity to do that.
Yeah, we have really bought into quality deer management, and as you know, Mississippi put that on the books. I'm just showing just for you, and I'll describe it. But this is a deer that I got this year, over 160 inches, on a tree farm that we lease, and it's a deer we had about 3 years of experience with on cameras and whatever. And we've for the most part, we have some neighbors that aren't on board with us, but the reality is you're never going to get everybody on board. And because a neighbor might kill it, there's no reason you should kill it. And we let it live, and it's a great story of what happens when you manage the herd appropriately. And I'm excited about that. And the Boone and Crockett Club has brought tremendous attention to those issues. In your role with the Boone and Crockett Club, do you find yourself talking about the North American model for wildlife conservation very often?
Only about daily. So, no, I mean that. I mean, if you look at threats to hunting, threats to our what we enjoy and what you enjoy about being able to take that beautiful animal, we're constantly having threats, both within our own camp, so to speak, and external threats in terms of hunting. And what we don't need to be doing is doing things that give the opposition the opportunity to shut it down. Because people say, well, it's we have the right to hunt in Mississippi. Well, doesn't mean you have the right to deer hunt 4 months out of the year. That's reduced to 1 day. That's still having the right to hunt. But I don't think that's what we want at all. But the North American model, whether you're looking at it, public trust or the prohibition for the commerce of dead wildlife, or everybody being able to participate, like you were talking about earlier, really providing hunting and fishing opportunities for all. That's a lot of what the North American model is all about. And at the very core of that is something you've mentioned as well, and that's scientific wildlife management.
Scientific wildlife management. You look at the work that Bronson Strickland's doing up at Mississippi State. You think about William McKinley and He's got such a. In fact, I really, for people who have not watched the Harrison County CWD public meeting, you can get it. You can go to the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks website, watch that public meeting, and watch the beginning of that meeting where they give you the data, what's happening around America as it relates to CWD. It was so extraordinarily well done. The department, at least the scientists at the department, have a really good handle on what we should be doing, and they really know what the trends are in America. It's exciting to see that as well. But if you think about it, in a lot of ways, Mississippi is leading, at least in having these conversations, and really, really important. Quality deer management being among them. We've been a leader in America, and we've got to work to stay there, though. We can't drop our guard, can we, James?
Absolutely. You'll get a kick. You'll know I'm a real nerd when I tell you this, but my 11th grade science project, I focused on the contribution of soil and age to deer antler growth. That was 11th grade. So I'm a real nerd if I did that. We can't lose sight of those important things that make our state and make our country, and it really separates us from the rest of the world. Norman Schwarzkopf, who was a member of Boone and Crockett, once said that the United States and Canada are the only two places where the ordinary citizen can go out and hunt and fish, and that's something we've got to preserve.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I had a guest from South Africa actually once say on my show that within 10 minutes of where we're sitting right now, we can be on public ground somewhere, that you can't do that anywhere else in the world. It's just an amazing thing that we have access to. Hey, when we come back on the other side, we're going to talk a little bit more about selling wild animals and why it's important for us to nip that in the bud as we continue our conversation with James Cummings. We'll see you after this break. Welcome back to Super Talk Outdoors. I have my friend James Cummings, who's the Executive Director for Wildlife Mississippi and the current president of North America's largest conservation organization, the Boone and Crockett Club. Hey, before we go to the sell and transfer of white-tailed deer and have that conversation, I just want to ask you real quick about Wildlife Mississippi. We haven't really talked much about that, but this is an incredibly important organization led by some incredible volunteer leaders in our state, isn't it?
We've got a great board, and a lot of what we focus on is not just either acquiring more land or litigation, but really working on developing incentives and mechanisms for private landowners. In fact, I'll be in Washington, D.C. tomorrow and the next day working on the next farm bill, on the conservation title of the farm bill.
And that's important in Mississippi because, as you and I suspected, as you helped teach us during the conversations about the Outdoor Stewardship Trust Fund, there's enormous opportunities for us in terms of matching funds. And so the first allotment of money goes out. We're doing a good job at matching. I expect the matching dollars to continue to rise as the Farm Bill gets reauthorized. Great opportunities for Mississippi in that regard. But it's exciting to see that we've hit the ground running, isn't it, buddy?
Absolutely, and I commend the legislature for their great job on passing the Outdoor Stewardship Trust Fund.
So look, we see legislation today in front of the legislature that's going to deal with the selling of wildlife, especially deer. That's something we talk about a lot. Wouldn't the Boone and Crockett Club like it if selling deer produced larger deer?
I think Theodore Roosevelt is turning over in his grave as you say that. So, absolutely not. I mean, this genetic manipulation and things like that are against all the principles that the club stands for. It's not about free-ranging wildlife. It's not ethical. It may be lawful in some states, but look, I don't want to be Texas. Nevada has things. That doesn't mean Mississippi needs to follow everything Nevada's doing. Mississippi has a very much in terms of a natural way of natural wildlife. We don't have a bunch of exotics running around, and I think that's important. It's kind of a Latin word, fera naturam, which means wild by nature. And if I kind of go back, and that means these animals should be kept in the wild. We don't need to domesticate those. If I look at the Mississippi Code that goes back to 1932, defined a game animal, and it made our state the trustee of those. We were talking about the public trust doctrine earlier. And of course, the Attorney General's opinion, would make these, illegal except as permitted by law. Well, I mean, I could go commit a crime except as permitted by law. So certainly that's one opinion. We have a very different opinion. We believe that the law of nature or wild by nature, that supersedes rulemaking. For example, I mean, if I look at, say, the 16th section in Lowndes County where there's a lot of gravel mines, or any 16th section where there's agricultural or forestry rights, they don't give that away. You have to pay for that,
Yeah.
and we can't be giving away something that belongs to the state, so that didn't make sense at all. But I'm really glad. I agree with your comment earlier. The legislature should be the ones, if there's going to be anything to do with selling wildlife, that needs to be conducted by the legislature. There's two exceptions. You can sell like bass and bluegill and brim for stocking purposes and parts of deer, but most people don't realize it. You can't even sell a mounted deer. But there's plenty of carport sales and garage sales that do, but that's illegal as well. So that's the.
Yeah, you mentioned the AG's opinion. What happened is and this is what piqued everyone's interest. Deer breeders asked the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks Commission to seek an Attorney General's opinion on this from Lynn Fitch. The previous Attorney General's opinion, written by Jim Hood, was extraordinarily well written. It was detailed, and it was everything that we as conservationists and outdoorsmen and women would want. It was extraordinarily well written. But, again, I'm a former publisher, so I understand how this works. It's not unusual at all for Attorney Generals to reverse previous Attorney General's rulings. The fact that it's so fluid like that is more the reason why this ought to be in the hands of the legislature. But essentially what Lynn Fitch's ruling did is enable the commission to make this decision. And so with only three votes, they could actually make it legal to sell and transfer white-tailed deer in Mississippi. This door needs to be shut, and the way to shut it is to have the legislature do what it's doing. So hopefully this is going to be a spirited discussion, that it will result in legislation that is voted and signed by the governor, and we can move on away from this issue. But that's the problem with an AG's opinion. It can always be reversed.
That's right. I've never met Jim Hood before, but his opinion was spot on, in my opinion. And if I look at some of the bills in the legislature, Chairman Kincaid in the House has done a phenomenal job of trying to protect the ordinary citizen that we were talking about earlier, by making sure that the state's most popular outdoor recreation, and that's the hunting of white-tailed deer, stays exactly where it is, and that's for the good of our health and the good of our state's economy as well.
Well, there were a couple of bills last year that were moving along pretty good, and then they got killed. And we'll maybe one day we'll talk more about the process that led to that. But at the end of the day, they were killed, and so we had a chance to close the door last year, and we didn't. So we have a chance again this year to do it again, and hopefully they get it done this year. It's I think these painful pivot points. Every state faces them. I think
That's
what
right.
you have to have is a conservation soul. You have to have conservation organizations. You have to have independent voices like mine. You have to have people who are willing to rally together and put their special interests aside and say, okay, how can we make decisions today that will preserve these resources in a way that generationally our kids and our kids' kids can enjoy it the way that we have? And it should guide us, but often it doesn't, unfortunately. But that's the nature of the beast. That's why you have to have conservation organizations in this state. That's why you have to have legislators who care deeply about this, like in the case of Kincaid, the chairman of the House Wildlife Committee. That's the way it works. But I hope the debates this year lead to closing the door.
I hope so. I was very disappointed last year when these bills were not even brought up for a vote. And because the people of Mississippi, I think they see the importance of this. If I look at a National Rifle Association publication, they did a survey, and as controversial as dog hunting is, 55% of the people support dog hunting. Well, let's go down with hunting around on a property with a high fence, and that falls into the 20s, and strongly supports falls into the eight digits. This is stuff that NRA, our partners, Boone and Crockett's partners, are working on. This is something that a lot of legislators should pay attention to, because if I look at their bios, many of them are members of NRA. But even down to people like NRA and others are right on the same page with us on this.
Well, you know this about high fences that when this debate was happening last year, a lot of high fence owners were very upset because they're not deer breeders. You know, they have a high fence for whatever purposes that they have. The number of deer breeders in the state, I think, number around 5. That could have changed somewhat. In terms of high fences, you know, the fact that, you know, how many totally contained high fences are there really in Mississippi, you know, where trees haven't fallen on them or they haven't been maintained properly? It's not high fence owners generally, even though there are ethical concerns about that are focused on this issue. It's really just a very select few deer breeders, and you know that's kind of that situation. And, so James, yeah, go ahead.
And you know, while I'm not crazy about high fences, you know, to me, going the next step in terms of importing and breeding deer, you know, look, this is not about opposing high fences. This is about stopping the sale of deer. And this is not about ethics. This is about money, period. Money. That's all it's about, you know, and we've got to recognize that that's all this is about. And it's not about money for the state. It's about money for putting the larger deer population at risk for the benefit of a few.
I think you said it really well. And as long as that issue is hanging out there, we're going to be focused on it. So while you're in Washington, what all are you going to be doing?
So primarily, I'll be working on the Farm Bill, and then I also sit on the board of the Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation. So we have our leadership change dinner tomorrow evening. And so that's going to be the main thing, but primarily that, and then working on the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill is so important to Mississippi. I'll give you an example. Wetland Reserve, they just announced a new round of funding. Mississippi received 20% of the entire national pot of dollars. We wanted 25. I'm just kidding, but we're real pleased with that. But that just gives you an example of why it's so important to the state.
James, these are such important conversations. I wish you a lot of luck in Washington as you go there, as we continue our conversations about the North American model for wildlife conservation, the makeup of the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks Commission. All these legislative debates and conversations are so important to preserving Mississippi's wildlife legacy. Hey, Representative Timmy Ladner from Poplarville is going to be joining us, I think, after the break. If he's not able to join us, then we'll have James hang around for a few minutes. We'll see you after this break. Welcome back to Super Talk Outdoors. We actually had Representative Timmy Ladner from Poplarville on the phone. We were having some issues with Skype. So what we did was we asked James to hang around. I've got a really important conversation that I want to have with James here, and you'll understand that here in just a second. And we're in the process of getting Representative Ladner scheduled for next week. We'll spend a half a show with him and talk to him about where his passion for the outdoors comes from, what's the latest on his bill. He is creating a really, really important conversation in our legislature, and I look forward to introducing him to the community. You know, one of the things, James, that I am so interested in watching is sometimes, you know, the anti-hunting crowd it gets loud, and we as hunters probably don't speak loud back enough to them, but. Thank God that doesn't raise its ugly head in Mississippi too often, but it's really important for us to stay focused on the role that hunters play in conservation, isn't it?
Yeah, and while you say it might not, you made the comment about Mississippi, but there's plenty of ways that if I'm an anti, for example, right now, I mean, like you know, 2 weeks ago, I was in Las Vegas at the SHOT Show. That's the Shooting, Hunting, and Outdoor Trade Show, the largest outdoor trade show in the world. I was meeting with Federal, I was meeting with Remington, I was meeting with Browning, a lot of different companies. And if you look, they've been going after lead bullets. So now we're looking at alternatives. So, you know, I understand there's going to be a powder shortage. So, I mean, there's because of Ukraine. So there are a lot of things that the way they can go after things without just being in your face and opposing stuff, you know, but, you know, I think so many times we as hunters or we as sportsmen and women, we do things, you know, like Cecil the lion. If you remember all that, if you mentioned Wisconsin, this was a dentist in Wisconsin that shot a lion that came out of a park in Africa. But, you know, I'm thinking about a quote. And by the way, when I was out at the SHOT Show, one of our Boone and Crockett members was there. And I'm going to read a quote. I'm going to read the quote. Then I'm going to tell you who it is. And he said, if you wait wait through long, cold hours in the November woods with a bow in your hands, hoping a buck will show, or if you spend days walking in the African bush, trailing Cape buffalo while listening to lions roar, you're sure to learn hunting isn't about killing. Nature actually humbles you. Hunting forces a person to endure, to master themselves, even to truly get to know the wild environment. Actually, along the way, hunting and fishing makes you fall in love with the natural world. That's why hunters so often give back by contributing to conservation. That's Don Trump Jr.
Yeah.
That's Don Trump Jr. that said that.
Really?
You probably weren't going to guess that one.
Yeah.
But I think he's exactly right. So many times that I mean, my wife calls me. She said, "You're going deer watching again," because I enjoyed looking and trying to go after that large buck. And of course, at the end of the year, end of the season, I have to catch up on my doe quota after the rut, I might add.
Sounds like us.
Yeah. but so many times we as hunters, we do things that cause people to oppose us. And we've got to, with 80% of Americans now living in an urban space, we've got to do a better job of making sure that they understand why conservation and hunting and fishing is part of our heritage here in America and why it should continue. And so I really think that's so important. And again, we often shoot ourselves in the foot.
Hey, you and I talked about this last year. When hunters, outdoorsmen are fighting with each other, the anti-hunting community loves that, don't they?
Absolutely. You know, that's one of my favorite African proverbs is when elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers. And that's so often, and we find that in the conservation community. Or look at what we're doing right now. We're arguing over, deer breeders. So you have the hunting community or the hunting and shooting community arguing among themselves. The anti-hunters are loving it, So that's not what we should be doing at all. We should be working on figuring out how to advance conservation, doing the good things like smart people like a Timmy Ladner or a Chairman Kincaid are doing.
I say at the end of my opening comments of the show today that we need to start a movement. There's always a movement of sorts in the state because you've got a lot of conservation organizations that are focused. Sometimes we need an issue to get around that will rally the state of Mississippi in a way that says all outdoorsmen should pay more attention in this moment. And I think we need to do a better job of explaining why it's important to them to do that, don't we?
Yes, and I think we do. For the most part, we don't do. And I'm not speaking of you. I'm speaking of my colleagues. We don't do a very good job at all educating people why things are important and teaching them how do we solve some of Mississippi's problems like human health. Wild game is so important to health and it's nutritious. It's a form of good outdoor recreation. It helps burn calories, and we're one of the a state that gets the least amount of exercise. But things like that, how can we do things utilizing outdoor recreation in a way that benefits the state and makes it a better place to live, work, and raise a family?
No doubt about that, man. What a great tone to leave you on. I can't wait to have you back, James Cummings. Well,
I look forward to being back. I want to talk more on why things should be wild. You got to promise me that one day.
We're going to have a whole show about it. We're going to have a whole show. You've written a book on it. We're going to have a whole show. Next week, we'll have Representative Timmy Ladner join us to talk about his bill to change the makeup of the Department of Wildlife, Fisheries, and Parks Commission. Look forward to that. And listen, have a great day. And as I always end every show, stay safe when you're in the outdoors. Stay safe. Have a great week, and God bless you. We'll see you next Monday.